Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. It is always an honor and a delight to have Yasuhiko Kimura back. This is the 8th in the series of New Spirituality for the Future. What do you have for us today, Yasuhiko?
Okay, good morning. So this is the 8th session, as you said, in the series of 9 presentations and discussions under the title of New Spirituality of the Future. And our theme today is the Fourfold Vision and the Age of Imagination. And the Age of Imagination is the title of my book that will come before I pass away. In the last session, I very briefly touched upon the Fourfold Vision, quoting William Blake. He says this in his letter to Thomas Butts in November 22nd, 1802. Now I, a fourfold vision, see, and a fourfold vision is given to me. 'Tis fourfold in my supreme delight, and threefold in soft Beulah's night, and twofold always. May God us keep from single vision and Newton's sleep. Today, we will delve deeply into it, contrasting and integrating Blake's fourfold vision with Johann Wolfgang Goethe's virtually identical fourfold vision. Nietzsche considered Goethe to be the prototype of the Übermensch. Had he known William Blake, he would have also considered Blake as such. And I regard Blake and Goethe not only as the prototype of the Übermensch, but also as the exemplar and harbinger of the age of imagination to come after the age of reason and modernity. There's a term or movement called postmodern or metamodern, but I deem them both to be the reactionary terminal end of modernity. The age of imagination goes beyond that. In the 6th session, we discussed Nietzsche's pronouncement that God was dead. Then in the last session, the 7th session, we resurrected God, as you remember. And, because they have been like 45 days, let me just recap. So the origination of the current mode of consciousness in the breakdown of the bicameral mind in the axial age has culminated in the age of reason and enlightenment and modernity to bring about the techno-scientific civilization, which is a remarkable, unprecedented achievement of human intelligence. But with a myriad of intellectual, cultural, and social problems that are essentially unsolvable by the same kind of thinking with the same mode of consciousness. From the spiritual philosophical perspective, the fundamental shift that took place in the origin of consciousness in the breakdown of the bicameral mind was a shift of God's dwelling place, address, from the external to internal. God, the divine intelligence, dwells literally within each one of us. Julian Jaynes, being a secular intellectual, did not see the significance of this. The cognitive error that humanity made was to continue to believe God to be external, and later even to deny God's existence altogether. With the first mistake came organized religions of the world. With the second mistake came materialism, which is anti-metaphysics metaphysics that denied God and the spiritual, and yet unwittingly retained the external authority power mentality, both of which have led to nihilism, of which Nietzsche spoke. The 5 salient features of the psychology of the Übermensch that we spoke about in the last session, I want to recapture here. And I like the term Homo Deus, divine human, more than Übermensch, and we will start to use this term, which is different from the way Yuval Harari uses, representing the techno-transhumanist conception. So anyway, so the psychology of Homo Deus, number 1, be cause, living in the realm of cause, not effect, living in the causal reality, not effect, which means you be the creator. So mentality and psychology of Homo Deus is that you are a creator of your life and of the world. Second is full spectrum intelligence and consciousness. We spoke about 4 different kinds of intelligences: computational, reason, imagination, and intuition, and spiritual. And then spiritual intelligence begin to infuse imagination and intuition to give us an insight into something higher than the corporeal. So psychology of Homo Deus is the full spectrum centered in spiritual intelligence. And in this, psychology becomes united with cosmology. And I talk about this today later. So human being becomes a macrocosm, it is a microcosm, which is not just seen as a part of this whole universe, but it actually contains the universe within. And you relate to the macrocosmos differently from the way materialistic science makes available. You are not an entity in the universe relating to the whole, but you are the microcosm containing all of the universe within, relating to the macrocosmos. Homo Deus has no unconsciousness. You are conscious. Your consciousness is no longer obscured. It is translucent. And finally, Homo Deus is a free thinker, authentic free thinker, and releases the imagination and creativity optimally. So those are 5 features of the psychology of Homo Deus. And the fourfold vision that we are going to talk about is a manifestation, or one of the manifestations of the full spectrum intelligence and consciousness. And it's also a manifestation of being in the realm of cause, not effect. And And William Blake used this term, and you can interpret his fourfold vision in two different ways, but each way kind of contains the other way. And I'm going to use one way which almost absolutely corresponds with Goethe's way. You see, so Goethe was born 9 years before Blake and died 5 years after Blake. So they are exact contemporaries. And they are so much alike, yet they knew nothing about each other. So they developed their cosmology, philosophy, morality, and the poetry entirely independent of each other, yet you can see so much commonality. This amazing, it is not a coincidence. How do you call this? Synchronicity. And fourfold vision that we are going to talk about today is explicitly written out by William Blake in his The Four Zoars, and by Goethe in his Faust, especially Faust Part 2. And interestingly, The Four Zoar was not published while Blake was alive. And Faust Part 2, according to Goethe's will, was published only after his death. So there was no way they knew each other's work. It's amazing. So two Übermensch, prototype of Homo Deus, two super geniuses, came up with this fourfold vision entirely independently. And not only that, they had basic philosophy of life. That was identical. So what we can call the threefold insight of Goethe and Blake. Number one, they consider authentic life to consist of creative tension between contraries. And the most creative of all tensions is the tension between self-affirmation and self-transcendence. Authentic life consists of creative tension between contraries. And the most creative of all tensions is the tension between self-affirmation and self-transcendence. Now, considered in isolation, neither self-affirmation nor self-transcendence is a valid ideal. Only the continual alternating motion between the two moral poles is life-giving. The authentic life of the spirit is one of ceaseless movement between two contrary psychological extremes, each deadly in itself. Between self-affirmation, which is self-contraction, and self-transcendence, which is self-expansion. In the Blake Goethean typology, The self-affirmation is considered devil, and transcendence considered Jesus. Exist in these two extremes, exists our moral life of becoming. And when there are two affirmations, different kind of two affirmation become contrary, they begin to negate each other. So negation, the self-assertive attempt at annihilating one's contrary, poses a constant threat to creative contrariety. We see that in politics. Democrat and Republican, left and right, they negate each other in their own self-assertion. And that is single vision. In twofold vision, you can see two. In single vision, you only see yourself and you want to annihilate the opposite. You don't allow the opposite to exist. So the most destructive negation are of two kinds, psychological and ontological. That is the suppression of energy, desire, and the denial of becoming, change. The psychological negation, suppression of energy, is rooted in the ontological negation, denial of becoming. And evil stems from the fear of energy and becoming. So Mephistopheles in Goethe's Faust and Urizen in Blake's Four Zoas. And actually Urizen shows up in many other of Blake's work. These are the great negators, and they suffer and inflict suffering because they have rejected the challenge of a creative becoming out of fear. When you look at the people who we consider evil, you can see that Mephistopheles and Urizen are archetype. Further, the creative tension of contraries changes into destructive opposition of mutual negations when rival individual forces begin to mirror each other in reciprocal violence. The philosopher and literary and cultural critic René Girard called this phenomenon the conflictual undifferentiation, which is at the heart of two poets' psychology of extreme self-affirmation. So René Girard, commenting on Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream. This is a quote from his A Theory of Envy, William Shakespeare. The more our characters tend to see one another in terms of black and white, the more alike they really make one another. The more these characters deny the reciprocity among them, the more they bring it about, each denial being immediately reciprocated. There is no great theater without a gripping awareness that, far from sharpening our differences, as we like to believe, our violence obliterate them, dissolving them into that reciprocity of vengeance, which becomes its own self-inflicted punishment. Conflictual undifferentiation. Mutual negation to that, lead to that. Number 3, Gyote and then Blake. The spirit of negation can be transcended and transformed by the spirit of imaginative mediation, the imagination as such. Psychologically, the imagination mediates between order and energy, cosmos and chaos. Morally, the imagination mediates between self-affirmation and self-transcendence. Ontologically, imagination mediates by diversifying consciousness so as to multiply opportunity for creative becoming. Under the creative guidance of the imagination, the bipolar contrariety or duality expand into a more complex dialect of the fourfold vision or quoternity. So the Faust and the Four Zohar are new modern versions of the book of Job. One of my most favorite book in the Bible. Beautiful, beautiful chapter. So in the book of Job, Job transforms himself from a paragon of religious morality within the paradigm of external God to the realization and direct experience of internal God after having suffered a calamitous misfortune and horrific psychic and physical torment, and after having endured a torturous doubt and agonizing dubitation. In the book of Job, Satan appears only twice, in the beginning, and after forcing Job suffer a torrent of tragedies in order to test Job's faith in God, he never reappears. And he is also presented as kind of God's partner, partner in crime. And he is a much sterner judge than God. And he doubts Job's sincerity. The Four Zohars and Faust present visions in which the Satan, Urizen, and Mephistopheles embodying the spirit of negation, their version of the Satan, learn about the possibility of self-transcendence in an expanded world of psychic diversity. So Urizen and Mephistopheles, from the very beginning, they partake of the drama. In the case of Four Zohars, it is nine nights of dreams. And they cause lots of suffering, and they themselves suffer. And with the infusion of imagination, they begin to see the possibility of self-transcendence themselves. And they are shown to be redeemable, if not redeemed. So the same story becomes much more complex in this fourfold vision. So when you read the book of Job and then Zohar, 4 Zohars and the Faust, you can see the evolution in the complexity of human mind from the time of the book of Job to the time of William Blake and Goethe. And it is important to see in this fourfold vision, in this the mind of Homo Deus, in this complexity, they see the fruitful competition between opposing forces is the law of life in both mind and the world. The contraries are in mutual opposition, but their creative tension is a life-giving power that paradoxically unites them. And this is what Goethe calls the authentic pulse of life. Walter Russell called this rhythmic balance interchange. So when we do not have their vision, when we see evil, what do? We try to eliminate evil. That's exactly what evil does. So by trying to eliminate evil in a dualistic mode of thinking, you become evil yourself. Conflictual undifferentiation. And Goethe and Blake sees this conflict, this tension, to be creative if we have a fourfold vision. So this authentic pulse of life, rhythmic balance interchange, you can see, for example, in the Taoism, in the complementarity of yin and yang. They are not into negating the other. Their whole purpose is to balance them out. And Tao Te Ching, so I Ching is yin and yang. Tao Te Ching, it has one more element, threefold vision. What happens with threefold vision? The third point begins to have also the poles. And by having those two poles, but one pole is bipolarity is higher ontologically, epistemologically, morally. And you want to find a balance between those two contraries. That is fourfold vision. And in order to keep the balance in the original conflict, you do need this. So when you keep the balance between those two higher poles and then influence the lower poles, it is possible to create an extremely creative and complex balance, which brings forth tremendous evolution and creation. So William Blake, long before he wrote the 4 Zohars, in the marriage of heaven and hell, I think he was early 30s or late, I think early 30s. He says this: without contraries is no progression. Attraction and repulsion, reason and energy, love and hate are necessary to human existence. Opposition is true friendship. Both poets celebrate emanation, which is involution, and return, which is evolution, attraction, which is inhalation, repulsion, which is exhalation, contraction, which is concentration, and expansion, which is decentration. Every form of creative contrariety, they celebrate this because it is the authentic pulse of life. So for them, the most important contraries in the life of the human spirit are self-affirmation and self-transcendence. So self-affirmation is seen as the centripetal movement of contraction, concentration, inhalation, and self-transcendence is seen as the centrifugal movement of expansion, decentration, and exhalation. So self-affirmation is imagined in the image of opacity, and self-transcendence, the image of translucency. So the authentic pulse of life is respiration, breathing. That is the rhythmic balanced interchange between self-affirmation and self-transcendence, self-assertion, and self-renunciation, self-preservation, and self-surrender. You can see some of the religions, they go on that self-transcendence way back, and it becomes a negation of itself. So extreme self-affirmation is the fixation in being and stasis, and denial of becoming and change. Extreme self-transcendence becomes its own self-denial, and hence ceases to be self-transcendental. Do you understand? When you are into self-renunciation, you are actually asserting it. You are not transcending self-transcendence. So again, this conflictual undifferentiation with extreme self-affirmation. So fixation in becoming and change and denial of being in stasis becomes its being and stasis, yes? Both Blake and Goethe associate the devil explicitly with negation through excessive self-affirmation, although there can be negation through excessive self-transcendence as well, as I mentioned. In the broader sense, any negation becomes devilish, evil, once it upsets the rhythmic balanced interchange of self-affirmation and self-transcendence that constitute the healthy spiritual respiration, breathing, the authentic pulse of life. And as I mentioned, in Blake and the Goethe's conception, devil, the Urizen, and Mephistopheles are humanized. So they are redeemable, if not yet redeemed. And to be redeemed, they must learn to recognize the legitimate claims of energy and of creative becoming through the infusion of imagination. And that is done by their female counterpart. This learning requires the assistance of the imagination, because it is the imagination that provides the saving measure of self-transcendence to counteract and balances the self-assertiveness at the heart of both devils' negations. Now, would you be so kind as to put the first page of the visual? Yes. So I put together this fourfold vision expressed by Blake and Goethe. We can call this the holy quaternity of the immortals, or in the word of Blake, the human form divine, Homo Deus. So Homo Deus had these 4 dimensions and fourfold vision. So in the beginning, the dualistic contraries are between Ruva and Urizen. Ruva represent passion, desire, emotion. Urizen represent overwhelming control, reason, like a superego. In the case of Faust, the Faust is the passion and emotion, although he is also very intelligent. And Mephistopheles represents superegoic reason, intellectual diamond. In the case of Faust, the first part 1, only people showing up is basically Faust and Mephistopheles. In the case of William Blake, almost everybody shows up from the very beginning to the end. And they go through some changes. So these are the Ruva and Urizen are the original contraries. Passion, desire, emotion, reason, control, superegoic control. Then they start to become infused by its own counterpart. But before that happens, new, higher contraries shows up, which is Ross or Ursona, representing imagination originally, with the infusion of its feminine counterpart. In the case of for Zoars, it is Enithamon. It's become transcending imagination and loving creativity. And Ruva will have a counterpart, Tamas, in its union with its feminine counterpart, Enyon, represent compassion. So passion and compassion. In the case of Faust, is homunculus, representing intuition, counterbalancing emotion. So if you look at me, so there's an original horizontal contraries between Ruva and Urizen. And imaginative element appears which takes on the contrary. And then each of the bipolar of the higher start to create a contrary with the lower. So it is not like this, going like this. Sometimes that happens, but in this particular case, go like this, yeah? 45-degree shift, so to speak. And Enyasamon and eternal family in the case of Gyote. Is the transcendental imagination that infuses all the other imaginative elements in others. And this is a goddess. And in the case of Gyote, eternal feminine is more prominent, but its counterpart is God. So this is Gyote's and Blake's answer to beyond good and evil, you can say, in the dimension of morality. And if we can develop fourfold vision, we will be able to create an entirely new kind of politics in the world. We can go beyond left, right dichotomy. Okay, would you, so that's that. Would you be so kind to go back to the, yes, not this one, go back, yes, we'll go back there. So far, so clear.
Yes, very much. Please go ahead.
Great. So that's the fourfold vision that was conceived by the Blake and Gyote. And you can get the sense. Somehow you'll transcend ontologically and epistemologically from the realm, dimension, in which contraries exist. And in the higher dimension, you generate its own contraries and create a tension between the two. That tension between the two also, you don't manage, but create a field in which the bottom contrary is also being maintained. So it is a constant dance, rhythmic balanced interchanges. And what is critical is that it is imagination, mediation by imagination, this fourfold vision and fourfold creative tension is maintained. So now, what do I mean by the age of imagination? And obviously, the age of imagination, this title, was inspired by my most favorite founding father, Thomas Paine's The Age of Reason. And he says this in his book, The Age of Reason, chapter 7. There is not throughout the whole book called the Bible any word that denotes to us what we call a poet, nor any word that describes what we call poetry. The case is that the word prophet, to which later times affixed a new idea, was the Bible word for poet. And the art of prophesizing meant the art of making poetry. It also meant the art of playing poetry to a tune on any instrumental music. So he knew. And without high degree of imagination, you cannot understand the Bible. Thomas Paine only criticized churchianity. He actually used the word churchianity, not Christianity. He only criticized non-Christ Christ, not Christ himself. And like every other founding father, he didn't question the existence of God, although he is called atheist. He had a different kind of conception of God, which is Spinoza's conception of God, immanence. By the way, it is very akin to Blake and Goethe as well, both of whom studied Spinoza. Now, would you be so kind as to put this again, and we can ask Ambika to read this. I love how she reads these things. Ambika, would you be so kind as to read William Blake's All Religions Are One? Is she there?
She can't hear on mute.
Go ahead, Ambika.
Yeah,
Unmute
please
you.
read for us.
Okay, now I'm unmuted.
Yes, thank you.
The left column, or
Yes, only left column.
all religions are one. The voice of one crying in the wilderness, William Blake. The argument, as the true method of knowledge is experiment, the true faculty of knowing must be the faculty which experiences. This faculty I treat of. Principle 1, that the poetic genius, creative soul essence, spirit, is the true man, and that the body or outward form of man is derived from the poetic genius. Likewise, that the forms of all things are derived from their genius, which by the ancients was called as angel and spirit and demon. Principle 2, as all men are alike in outward form, so, and with the same infinite variety, all are alike in the poetic genius. Principle 3, no man can think, write, or speak from his heart, but he must intend truth. Thus, all sects of philosophy are from the poetic genius adapted to the weaknesses of every individual. Principle 4, as none by traveling over known lands can find out the unknown, so from already acquired knowledge, man could not acquire more. Therefore, a universal poetic genius exists. Principle 5, the religions of all nations are derived from each nation's different reception of the poetic genius, which is everywhere called the spirit of prophecy. Principle 6, the Jewish and Christian testaments are an original derivation from the poetic genius. This is necessary from the confined nature of bodily sensation. Principle 7, excuse me, Principle 7, as all men are alike, though infinitely various, so all religions, and as all similars have one source. The true man is the source, he being the poetic genius.
Thank you. Would you go back to the original? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Ambika. So, in a simple way, he presented the vision of a spirituality, which is a spirituality of the age of imagination. It is not very complex. It is actually very easy to understand. So the new spirituality of the age of imagination is that the imagination is considered as God, the creative, eternal, infinite reality. The imagination as God, the creative, eternal, infinite reality is an original esoteric conception of divinity with an immense significance and potential. William Blake, of course, is not the first to express the conception. For example, the Sufi master Ibn Arabi, born 1165, died 1240. So his life overlaps with that of Rumi, identified God as the all-imaginer, poet of the pluriverse or multiverse. So in the 12th century, this Sufi master considered God as the all-imaginer, the poet of the multiverse. And he says this: God, the all-imaginer, is the innermost being of the real, the infinite, symbolically shown in the world as creatures that God imagines, which are metaphors. God is a poet, and only a poet can taste the real via sensory emblems. The real must be imagined. The conception of God as the imaginer, the poet, the imagination, transforms the passive, contemplative, awareness, knowledge-oriented spirituality of the past, of both the West and the East, into the active, creative, imagination and vision-oriented spirituality of the future, the spirituality of the age of imagination. So now I just want to go through something I shared with my people in my class. And please imagine, okay? So in Christianity, well, Shrikant, I was just talking about the Gospel of John. In Christianity, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with or beside God, and the Word was God. Now, what if we reconceive the Word, the Logos, as a divine image or vision, and God as the divine imagination or imaginer? sense of being to becoming, becoming containing being, and being continuously unfolding as becoming. Now, in Hinduism, in Vedanta, actually, the ultimate, absolute, eternal, infinite, transcendent reality is conceived as a trinity of Sat, which I call beingness, Chit, awareness, and Ananda, bliss. Beingness, awareness, and bliss. What if we reconceive Ananda as the supraconscious ecstatic intensity of the imagination? What if we reconceive Chit as the self-awareness of the imagination itself? What if we reconceive Sat as the beingness of the imagination? Satchidananda is a trying description of George Gruzev's world number 3, protocosmos, or he called it sun absolute. There is world number 1, and endlessness, ontologically prior to world number 3, which as the original creator source of the cosmoses and the universes is the pure imagination stream. Few people from your group asked me about the Gurujev, so I just add one more thing here. I consider Gurujev to be a truly unique spiritual teacher, and his teaching will have so much to say in the age of imagination, but it is also ancient. And Gurujev's teaching can be traced all the way back to Zoroastrianism, which was the most esoteric current of Zoroastrianism. How do they call it? Zoroastrianism? Yeah, Zoroastrianism. And Gurujev used the term helopas, absolute time, which means the Holy One who is all, which is his translation of Zurvan, the absolute, which stand above the duality of Ahura Mazda, the deity, and Ahiriman, good and evil. Zurvanism was considered to be heretic, so it was eliminated from the mainstream Zoroastrianism. But some stayed and absorbed into Sufism. So again, this Zurvan, the Holy One who is all, is the imagination stream. So this idea is not that is ancient. In Taoism, the Tao that can be described, that can be Taoed in words, is not the Tao eternal and infinite. No name designated thereto can ever capture its eternality and infinity. And Tao is virtually synonymous and equivalent in meaning with Logos. Now, what if we suffuse the Tao with the imagination and the power of the imagination? And Tao, De means power. So it gains something if you infuse Tao with imagination and in our conception. In Mahayana Buddhism, for example, the Yogacara school, Yuishikishu in Japanese, propounded the concept of Yuishiki, Chittamatra, mind only, the metaphysics of the primacy of consciousness. Now, what if we suffuse consciousness, awareness, chitta or chit, with the imagination? Imagination only. And a great Tibetan Buddhist scholar and my mentor, Harvard Gunsar's book on the evolution of Buddhism is titled From Reductionism to Creativity, Dzogchen and the New Science of Mind. From reductionism to creativity. Buddhism uniquely blossomed in Tibet and China by blending the abstract mathematical Indic mind, Indian mind, with the imaginative Tibetan and cynic Chinese and Japanese mind. The Dzogchen scriptures in Tibetan Buddhism and Kegon Kyo, Flower Garland Sutra, Avatamsaka Sutra, I think in Sanskrit. The Kegon Kyo in Chinese and Japanese Buddhism are such examples. This Kegon Kyo in 1,600 pages in English translation. In Chinese is one of the two most philosophically advanced Buddhist scriptures, the other being the Maha-Nirvana Sutra. But in terms of beauty and majesty, it is unsurpassed. If you have to read one Buddhist scripture, read this. And it poetically unfolds and explicates the Buddhist cosmology of the limitless multiverse, eternally being generated and created through metacosmic creativity and imagination. So there was again the sense of imagination in Buddhism. So not only imagination mediate the conflict that arises in the age of reason, where reason is considered supreme. It also gives us an opportunity to solve many of the problems, not only social problems, but also philosophical and even scientific problems. But in many of the teachings of the world, including Gurdjieff, imagination hasn't been given a very glorified position. Why? So during the Axial Age, when the new mode of consciousness came into being, and the possibility of the internal God, the conscious identity with God and self was born, and esoteric schools have kept alive the actualization of the possibility of human consciousness for the achievement of the internal God, the identity of God and self, the equivalence of theology and ontology. And they have maintained, the esoteric schools maintain the right use of the power of imagination and maintain the supreme status of imagination in their teaching. But there is a wrong use of imagination. And it has become much more prominent than right use of imagination. And therefore, the religions of the world, they do not encourage you to be imaginative. So there is the reality creating imagination of the awakened consciousness based on the awareness of reality. And there is reality conceding imagination of the hypnotized consciousness based on the delusional thought or illusionary perception of reality. So Goethe's breaks and master Ibn Arabi's imagination, or imagination of the awakened being who is identical with God. And Gruzev's masterpiece, Elizabeth tells to his grandson, is a remarkable demonstration of the imagination, the poetic genius, which is an example of the right use of imagination. And yet, in the Gruzev's teaching, like many other teachings, concept of imagination is used usually in a negative sense. The imagination used in the wrong way, that is the delusional, illusionary, and hallucinatory use, because the wrong use of imagination is categorically more predominant in society. And that's also applies to spirituality. And those of you who have read his book or studied his teaching, he kind of makes fun of Kundalini, called Kunda buffer. Not because he didn't understand the real Kundalini, but he was sarcastically making fun of those people who misunderstood Kundalini. When you go to California, in every town, you have a Kundalini yoga teacher wrong teaching of Kundalini. And wrong use of Kundalini is the cause of faulty imagination. Let's see, how deeply can I go with this one? So I will just say briefly, I talked about this in my class, but just briefly. So maybe you can open that page 3.
There you go.
Okay. So let me, before I get to that particular one, I just want to talk about a few things. Number one. So according to Gruzev's formulation, the human being is a three-centered being. And what is called crown chakra, Sahasrara, is not technically a chakra because it is not inside a corporeal energy field of human being. And it is considered to be, according to Grujev, with which I agree, the active center. of the three center. And the whole chakric system, the 6 chakras, the subtle body inside the spinal column is considered to be the passive center. And the fourth, Anahata chakra, heart chakra, when integrated with the lower 3 and higher 3, becomes the third center, reconciling or neutralizing center, which is what he calls conscience. So according to law of 3, the 3-centered being, in order for it to be harmoniously integrated, this active center and passive center and neutralizing center has to be in harmony. And what harmonizes is this conscience, Anahata chakra, which is fully developed through the integration of it, of the 3 chakras below and 3 chakras above. And what is happening? The consequence of what he calls the organ kunda buffer is that the chakric system, the 6th chakra, is not properly connected with Sahasrara, while Anahata chakra is not properly connected with the lower 3 chakras. This leaves the chakric system passively and unconsciously influenced by the planetary forces. The upper 3 chakras functioning suboptimally, delusionally, and illusionary, and lower chakras functioning without conscious guidance. And that which is called Kundalini energy properly applies only to the 6th chakric system with the gradations of energetic refinement. While the real spiritual awakening involves the descending integration, which is emanation of all 3 centers. So Sahasrara connecting with the rest of the chakric system, the rest of the chakric system integrated so that heart chakra become fully activated to develop conscience and neutralize an active, reconciling active and passive centers. And this movement is like this, but primarily it is descending, emanation and return, emanation and return. So Kundalini rising is a returning. Without having the Kundalini descending, there is no ascending. And this whole anatomy and whole physiology and whole mechanism and organism need to be fully understood. And Gurdjieff's way of talking about harmonious development of 3 centers is one way to actually awaken Kundalini in the right way. And where does imagination come from? Of course, the highest center, the active center, Purusha. Purusha, through Sahasrara, connect with Prakriti that we are. So now, once our Kundalini energy is fully activated and we are harmoniously developed human being with fourfold vision, then we can harness the cosmic influences that we experience as macrocosmic beings. And Shrikant and I had conversation about why contemporary humans are not as sensitive as the ancient. That reason will be explained and we can regain that sensitivity. So after the scientific revolution, especially after Descartes, we begin to see this universe conceptually, which is good. But at the same time, we have lost the real connection to nature and the universe, because we begin to connect to nature and the universe through the mediation of concept. So now, I would like you to listen to this meditatively. And we want to reactivate our sensitivity by re-experiencing our being in the universe. Then the chakra system and what I will talk about this connection between micro and the macrocosm become very variable. So now the world or the universe of your experience and imperience, which means experience you experience externally and the imperience of the inner experience. So the world and the universe of your experience and imperience, which I call that monad that you are, is organically geocentric, or more precisely, auto-egocratic. You experience the universe as an organic and sacred whole, as a gestalt in your experience, as your monad. And the sacred is that which is irreducible. That is, you cannot reduce this. Of course, we have done conceptually, reducing everything to its part. But ontologically, when you experience this, your epistemological movement is always from whole to part. You experience the whole, and then you begin to analyze. You begin to pay attention to the parts. But then, when you put the parts together to create the whole, you cannot do that. Because every time we go into the smaller and smaller part, you lose something. Wholeness is indivisible. So that's why Buckminster Fuller says synergy is the behavior of the whole system, unpredicted by the behaviors of its subsystems, taken separately from the whole and observed apart from the whole. So when you're putting together all of the subatomic particles, never make atomic dimension. And atomic dimension will not cause molecular dimensions. That something needs to be added. That what is added come from the above, not from below. So when we experience this universe as a monad, universe is within, and there's a really very, very acute experience of the whole. So in your conceptual imagination, theoretically, you can construct an acentric or omnicentric or heliocentric universe. But in your immediate perceptual experience, you are the monad, remains, you as the monad remains geocentric or auto-egocratic. Living in the modern techno-scientific environment and with the materialistic and with the materialistic worldview, we have lost the holistic sensitivity and sensibility toward nature and the universe. That is the sense of the sacred. So the intimate, immediate sacred experience has a scientifically verifiable basis. So they used to say, as above, so below. You can also say, as within, so without. That is, it is not primitive or superstitious, but scientifically verifiable experience of heightened awareness of the intelligence. So when you look at this, this last chart.
I'm going to bring that up.
Yes,
Shall I-
please.
Oh, sorry. Just a second. Let me stop share again. This happens in Zoom occasionally. Give me just a second. Yeah.
So let's see. Yes. So when you are being the monad that you are, and microscopically experiencing the universe, that is sacred. It is only one singular universe. I cannot experience your experience. You cannot experience my experience. I show up in your experience as a part of your experience, and vice versa. Stars, planets, everything. And you experience them. And everything is within yourself. And when we conceptualize this experience in the way ancient did, you begin to see highly scientific basis to their understanding. There's an isomorphism between microcosm and macrocosm as experienced in your monad. This does not stop you from creating a theory of the universe, going outside of your monad and conceptually using your conceptual imagination to create a theory, which is extremely important. We need to have it. But I want you to see how sensitive and precise the ancient were in their conceptual imagination in formulating the kind of universe that they were experiencing. So when you look at the chakric system, each chakra is expressed as the lotus flowers, yes? First one has 4 petals, next one has 6 petals, next one has 10, 12, 16, 2. And then Sahasrara has 1,000. And why is that? The ancient astronomers, whom we call astrologers, have done an amazing level of thinking and conceptualizing through their acute sensitivity, feeling it. They connected the first chakra with earth, but earth, not in this earth, it is a quality of earth. Second chakra, water. Third chakra, fire. Fourth chakra, air. Fifth chakra, ether. And sixth chakra, spiritual. And seventh, divine. Now, they also made a connection between the chakras and planet as experienced in their monad. And the first chakra is connected to the moon. Second, connected to Mercury. Third, Venus. Fourth, Sun. Fifth, Mars. Sixth, Jupiter. And crown to Saturn. Why? Now, it takes too much time to fully elaborate on this, but in the numerology, we study the quality of numbers, and the things that exist as a whole has a structural quality, which we call Gestalt. Is a wholeness structure, quality of wholeness structure. That Gestalt has quality, and that quality has corresponding numbers. And this brilliant polymathic scientist from Germany, Oscar Hinz, living in India, studying Tantra and yoga, and all those things, discovered the connection. So Moon's Gestalt number is 4. Mercury's Gestalt number is 6, Venus 10, Sun 12, Mars 16, Jupiter 2. Now, Sahasrara and Saturn, 1,000 is not really a number. It's kind of a shorthand for infinite. Indefinite. So he has not fully connected, but at that time there was only planet left, it was Saturn. But now, after that, the Uranus and Neptune have been discovered. And I am sure you can make connection with chakras. And that's why I believe that there are 9 chakras, not 7 chakras. And 4th and 8th chakra in the 9 chakric system are what Gurujev calls stopindras, which is the center of gravity, and is an additional shock that is required to connect the first 3 chakras with the top 3 chakras. There's need to be some extra energetic input. And the 8th chakra is in the same way connecting Ajna and Sahasrara into this. And they should be considered a chakra too. That's why I say 9 chakras. So I'm sure Oscar he is still alive. He may continue to do his research and make this connection. His book is called Tantra Vidya. Amazing book. Tantric knowledge, yes, or wisdom. So what this means is that actually the universe is full of meanings. This is a meaningful universe. In the beginning was the meaning. And what Gurujev calls objective science assumes the meaning from the very beginning. And there's a biologist, I think his name is pronounced Jesper Hofmeier, who has been developing something called biosemiotic. This is his book called The Sign of Meaning in the Universe. And he is discovering that the whole universe is like a semiotic. And Gurujev and I and Blake, all those people will go even one step further. This is universe, a semantic universe. So the age of reason is the age of imagination, and the age is the age in which imagination reigns supreme. In the Hindu caste system, artists will come above the remaining 4, so to speak. They will play most important role. Will regain the sense of sacredness and begin to re-experience the universe in the way the ancient experience, in addition to our conceptual knowledge of the universe. So this is part of what I wrote this last night.
Wonderful. Thank you, Yasuhiko. It's just incredible. I would like to have some time for questions. Would you like to take a short break while we get the questions?
It's okay. It's almost, I spoke 90 minutes almost. Huh?
Yes.
Wow, I didn't know.
It was amazing. It was amazing. All right, folks, go ahead and type exclamation mark if you'd like to ask questions. Please keep your questions brief. Yasuhiko, do you want to take all? Do you want people to put all their questions on the table, or do you want?
All that, and then
All right. So, folks, go ahead and type an exclamation mark. I'm going to take all the questions, and then Yasuhiko will answer all of them together. First, by Evanik. Evanik, go ahead. Give me just a second. Hold on. Go ahead, Evanik.
Hi, thank you, Shrikant, and thank you, Yasuhiko. This was amazing. I have a question going back. You were talking earlier about the Tao not negating each other. And you spoke about negating opposition. You become it, and you use the example of evil. When you try to fight evil, or you try not to be like that evil person, you become evil. So is the solution is to just let evil people be, not to fight it?
Yeah, okay, I will answer that question after this. I included Gurdjieff for you. Okay, good. Yeah, I got the answer. Question.
Okay,
Yeah.
folks, go ahead and type exclamation mark. This is your last chance for asking questions. So go ahead. We're going to take all the questions, and then we're going to answer all of them together. Next up is Iver. Iver, go ahead.
Hi, Yasuhiko. Great talk as usual. I'm curious, in the cosmology you've illustrated, for one to really become aligned with the higher ideals you're describing, I think the person would have to come to terms with their own sense of bias. But I don't understand how they actually do that within the cosmology. It's almost as if I have the imagination, I don't need to worry about my own biases, which I think is blinding. So
Okay.
I'm curious what you think about that.
Okay.
Wonderful. Excellent question, Iver. Next up is going to be Rupali, followed by Chang. Rupali.
So I have 4 questions. Is it okay to ask all 4?
Go ahead. Just be brief and go ahead and ask all 4.
Very good. So I'll piggyback on what Evanik said. I struggle with the balance between evil and good, and how not to be sucked into the evil of bad things that are happening. And how is that balance maintained between those two opposites? Say at your workplace, when somebody is pushing your limits. The second question I have is about the examples of extremes, the extremes of self-affirmation and self-transcendence, because it can be negating, and I didn't quite understand that. So if you can give me some examples of how that manifests. The third thing that I want to talk about is imagination. So I had to pull out one of Maria Montessori's quotes, because she says, "The secret of good teaching is to regard a child's intelligence as a fertile field in which seeds may be sown to grow under the heat of flaming imagination." And she says, the child is more spiritually elevated than is usually supposed. He often suffers not from too much work, but from work that is unworthy of him. And so rethinking education, because she's not saying that education is for teaching you math, science, or the part about reason. Yes, that's going to come, but you have to elevate the child beyond that. The goal is not so much the imparting of knowledge as the unveiling of the developing spiritual energy.
Wow.
And she calls,
amazing.
She calls the child the spiritual embryo, like the poetic genius.
Yes.
And I mean, it is just a very different way of looking at education. If we say, if you have this fourfold vision and can become the basis or the developmental of the spiritual being as opposed, and we've seen this in Bhagavad Gita, we've seen while reading Gospel of John. And my fourth question is about nature and connecting to nature. So we talked about this last time also. And what are practices in daily life to connect with nature? So I'll leave it at that. Thank you so much. I have to go back and listen to it multiple times to get more.
Yes, Rupali, I'm in the same position. It was just so incredible. And I know that it was so dense in presentation. Amazing. Next up, Zheng, what's your question?
Yeah, it's quite an amazing lecture. My question is, I really like the idea, we're moving to this imaginative world, but it seems in reality, what we see is just the opposite. In America, it seems the artist I see is punished, and the high IT technical people are rewarded financially, and we become this very materialized world, and we disconnect from nature. And they start this metal work. Kids are absorbed by the computer games instead of interested in the physical world. So that's what I see in reality. So it's just opposite from what's make a healthy life or healthy living. So I really like this idea, and I see that will be the solution, but I don't see how we move into that direction. See what I see, just the
Wonderful.
opposite direction we're moving.
Thank you, Jeng. Great question. All right, Yasuhiko, do you want me to summarize all the questions, or do
No,
you
it's
want
okay. Yeah, okay. So some of the questions come from misunderstanding, which is my fault because I didn't make it clear. And before I say anything, Rupali, what is amazing is that Maria Montessori was a mathematician. She was a mathematical genius. And I find that all the great mathematicians and scientists, they are highly imaginative people. And what Drake and all those people I mentioned basically says imagination is not only the chief function of the universe or God, but the substance of which the universe is made. That's very hard for people to take, but just because we think fundamental material of the universe is an imagination. That's very difficult to take, and so there are ways to get to that at this moment. So anyway, so imagination is the key for education. There's no question. Now, in terms of this conflict that a few people talked about and biases and stuff. First of all, maybe it's best to give us some example. Yes. And when we say evil, good and evil, nothing is 100% good and 100% bad. No human being is 100% purely good, and 100% evil. When you look at the picture of Stalin, when he was smiling, somehow there's something about goodness of humanity shows up when he was smiling. The rest, maybe not. So there is no such thing as a good and evil conflict. Then opposing forces that has a different vector, number one. And each has what we call good or bad and bad elements. Now, what is good in this sense is the balance. Balance between all two opposite forces. Harmonious balance between opposing forces. Authentic powers of life is good. When it is not in existence, which is most of the case, it is bad, number one. Number two, when humans are opposing, they assert their way, and then they negate opposition's way. That is single vision. And what we call evil, generally speaking, not the way I define, what we call, that single vision negation, the spirit of negation that Goethe and William Blake talk about, spirit of negation is evil. So good is balance, bad is imbalance, and evil is this spirit of negation at all cost. So in politics, there you say we have a left and right, you know. Each party negate the other. Their purpose is to destroy the other party completely. That's single vision, and that is evil. There need to be both left and right. If politics is healthy, you know, there are ongoing arguments, and but somehow there's a balance. And you know, 4 years this party may take over, and the next party somehow going, and some society will be in harmony, dynamic harmony. Today it doesn't exist. What happened in the United States? Fundamentally, left took over. Even people who call themselves right is basically left. Left took over. Nothing wrong with left itself, but it took over. The single vision took over. And when single vision takes over, we call that evil. You see, starting Hitler, they could not allow any other way of being done their way. So the people who are not willing, they did this, he destroyed, it's called evil. So single vision, the spiritual negation is evil. And some people have that spirit much more than others. So, and that spirit of negation fundamentally comes from fear of becoming and change. Look, you want to insist upon your way. Nothing should be different. Becoming means change. So you want to stay there. You need to control. And that is what spirit of evil, negation, and single vision lead to and come from. So there's a fear of becoming. And imagination, you can't be imaginative if you are afraid of change and becoming. Imagination is the force of change and becoming. So Urizen and Mephistopheles, how do you pronounce his name? I only read, so you know I don't know ever know.
Mephistopheles, I think, is
Mephistopheles. They represent the spirit of negation, single vision. So that's one thing. Second, so balance is created by releasing people from the single vision. It is not to turn Republican to Democrat or Democrat to Republican or left to right, right to left. We need to free themselves from this single vision and move them into twofold vision, threefold vision, and fourfold vision. And to do that, cognitively and existentially, you need to be in a higher level of being. You need to be able to, so you had a single, so let's say right now, you know, I'm opposing, you know, positionally opposing to Shrikant on my screen. Now, and he has single vision, I have single vision. Now, to free yourself from this, you need to have a vision from above. Duality needs to become Trinity. But Trinity is unstable. It needs to have opposite. to have its own balance. So then top is balanced and bottom is help balanced from the top. So in politics, there's a fundamentally, there are two oppositions. One is individualism and collectivism. Traditionally, right is an individualist and left a collectivist. Now, both parties have this spirit of negation. So if individualist wins, we'll have anarchy. If the collectivist wins, we have communism. And neither works. What is the third? It is liberty and control, freedom and control access. Then freedom and control need to have a balance. Then it will start to interact with individualism and collectivism. And this higher access need to exist within each person. You don't want to create a party, liberty party and control party. No. It will defeat the purpose. Each human being needs to have this access. And if control wins, we have a tyranny. Right now, leftist and tyranny are winning. We need to find a way to have a movement toward more liberty. Working with both left and right. And they need to work together, you know. So right now, the single vision predominate in the world. From education to politics to business and academia. So that is my response to many of your questions. And in terms of bias,
Yasuhiko, can I make one
Yes.
comment? I know that last time I talked about Louis Sullivan, form ever follows function. You found it very useful. So
Yes.
there is another gem of his that I want to share with you because it integrates perfectly with what you're saying. Your observation that this going back and forth between self-affirmation and self-transcendence is crucial. That is what life is. In his autobiography of an idea, which culminates with the principle that form ever follows function. As a child, he formulates it this way. He says, life was beginning to break in upon him from outside. A continuous breaking in from the outside and breaking out from the inside was to shape his destiny. This breathing in and breathing out. And that's really the core of his theme, that is life.
Yes.
That conversation between the universe and you.
Yes.
Please go on about the bias.
Any question not unanswered?
Sure. There are some. One, give me just a second here. The first is, what is the proper approach to evil? That's one. Second is, what are the examples of the extreme of self-affirmation and extreme of self-transcendence, and what do they look like? What is the role of imagination in education? And how do you come to terms with your own bias? Last one was about culture, today's culture is materialistic and not spiritual. So imagination is actually devalued.
Mhm.
How do we change that? So you can take any of these, whatever you want to do.
Wow. In terms of bias, so long as we have a perspective, we will always be biased. So long as we remain in the universe in which many exist, we will always have bias. And what is more important to me is not to have a bias. No, than not to have a bias, is to have your unique perspective. So we cannot escape from having a perspective, therefore some kind of bias. But most people do not have their own perspective. What they call perspectives are basically implanted in them. Speaking of education, we go through some, some process of indoctrination, and our perspectives are influenced by the particular indoctrination that we have gone through. It is not our perspective. Very few people have an original perspective, original bias. And to me, the highest state of being human is to have a singular, original perspective. And that's number one. Number two, one of the ways to reach that is, to study different ideas, obviously. Most people try to, like when you say the transcendent unity of religion, there's a book by the title. And then people read many philosophical systems and religions, and they integrate. And then say they're all, unified. No, they don't integrate. Do you know what they do? They absorb different ideas in the paradigm of Hinduism, for example. Because Hindu is a very complex system. It is easy to absorb other philosophical systems and make it, a system. And they say, oh, they are all united. No, you are united into Hinduism. I like juxtaposition. So you study Vedanta, you study Buddhism, you study Christianity, you study Aristotle, you study Plato. Understand them. You need the imagination to understand them, first of all. You need to go into their world to be able to understand. After you study them, you can juxtapose them. And what happens is you begin to have your imagination. Do not try to integrate them based on something. Let them be. And then you begin to think. And that is closest that we can get to our original, original perspective. So we never, you see, Elohim in Christianity, Elohim is a God, but it is also plural. It's very interesting. It's more like a Brahman having many Atmans.
Yes.
And since Atman is Brahman, it is the same. At the same time, there are many. So it is a collection of Atmans. That is Brahman and Elohim. And imagine ourselves like a God in the Elohim community, and we each have a different perspectives, but it is somehow contributing to the whole. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Yasuhiko. It is just amazing, and I'm looking forward to our conversation in December.
Yes.
To build on this. And thank you very much, everybody. And we will see you soon.
Thank you.